Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I'm excited to welcome Andrew Carruthers. Andrew's journey started as an apprentice at a salon that instantly proved more to be had in the hair industry than could be seen from the outside. In the past 23 years, he's been a full-time hairdresser, salon owner, artistic director, education director, photographer, editorial stylist, educator, and coach both within and outside the hair world. As Andrew says, both my paths as a teacher and a personal coach were spawned from a feeling of paying it forward. Andrew saw firsthand how skilled teachers and his life coach were able to shape a future more expansive than his eyes first envisioned. He wanted to do the same for others, so teaching and coaching became a major focus early in his career. As artistic director for Paul Mitchell Schools and education director for Sam Villa, Andrew's passion turned towards building future teachers, coaches, and leaders. Again, all to offer those gifts that were given to him to the widest audience possible. As Andrew says, every coaching client I work with and every class I teach returns inspiration from my own journey. In his life coaching practice, The Journeyist, Andrew draws on his certification as a multiple brain integration technique coach trainer, an Oxygen Advantage advanced breathwork facilitator, and his education through Soul Salt Academy and Ultimate Coach University to support people in using their own intuition, compassion, and creativity to grow personally, spiritually, and professionally. Andrew says, I truly believe that our journeys are our best teachers. Motorcycle trips, outdoor adventures, meditation, music, and training in Aikido are all directly infused into Andrew's vision of life and therefore find their way into every class, every presentation, and every coaching session. In this episode, Andrew shares how he lost his voice and realized he needed to speak his truth. Andrew walks us through his journey and we discuss why it is important to speak our truth and identify opportunities where we need to ground ourselves. Andrew says, if you are open to your own journey and ready to explore forward with joy and curiosity, my greatest hope is that I can offer some part of my training and experience to support you on your path. Please find Andrew on Instagram at andrew.carruthers. And also, if you could leave a 5-star review at the end of the episode, I would truly appreciate it. Well, Andrew, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to have this conversation today. We've had the luxury of meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago through this 1-week challenge we did. But yeah, I really got to see some of the work you're doing, and including some of the videos you posted, which really inspired me to reach out to you, but which will be the topic for this episode. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and let the listeners know a little bit about what it is that you do and even where you're located.
Cool. Thanks for coming. I appreciate you reaching out for sure. It's awesome to just make new connections with different people. And yeah, I appreciate this. So I come from the hairdressing industry. Actually, I thought I was going to be a rock star. I was a failed rock star. And my sister was a hairdresser, and I would watch it seemed like she would go to work and had such a great time with people, and then they would hand her money. And not to mention, she actually had a pretty flexible schedule. So since I still wanted to be out on the road with bands and stuff, I thought, well, this could be a good career instead of trying to make a living off of being a rock star, which doesn't work that well. But what was kind of cool is, I'll keep this portion short, but what was cool is instead of going into like a hair school in Salt Lake City, you can still apprentice to get your hair license. And it was really fortuitous because I got to apprentice under this guy named Tyson Daniel. And at that time, especially, he was like the cool, young, hot hairdresser in town. And he was doing like these big hair shows, and he was, doing photo shoots and working behind the scenes at like runway shows and all this really cool stuff. But what ended up happening is he had an opportunity for me to teach a class, and this was only like 6 months into my apprenticeship. This was 2018. Or sorry, I guess that would be 2019 by the time this happened. But at that point, like I had barely learned to shampoo hair, but he needed someone to go out. He worked for this company called TG, which is a hair product company. And he's like, I need you to go out and teach this product knowledge class at the salon. Just basically like, here's your script, like just tell them what each product is and what it does. And I was like, I was so freaking terrified, dude. Like I was so terrified to go do this. But afterwards, the women at the salon were like, they were so grateful and they were so thankful and telling me all this cool stuff that they had learned. And that was like my hook on education. I was just like, wow, this is so my thing. And so that became a huge focus throughout my entire career as a hairdresser. And at one point, I started to get super burned out with trying to maintain a full clientele, trying to also educate, do all those different things. And so I started to train as a life coach. My life coach was actually starting to train coaches, other coaches. And so I got to be one of her first trainees. And that was, again, just one of those moments of like, wow, like I love doing this. So basically throughout my 20 some odd years of hairdressing, I mainly focused on being a teacher. I had a part-time coaching clientele on the side. And of course, like my different positions, I had a couple education director positions that I got to mentor people. So as my passion for hair itself started to disappear, what didn't disappear was my passion for education and coaching. So at the beginning of 2021, like so many of us after 2020, there was just that feeling of, okay, it's time to get your shit together and follow your passion.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started my company, The Journeyist. And so now my big focus is I mainly work with people that are educators, coaches. I do work with leaders, but only leaders that are looking to lead from more like a coach mindset, someone that's looking to support their staff in that way. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now is I do one-to-one coaching, I do events, I do keynote speeches, things like that, but all more within like mindset, communication, coaching, and education.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I guess the whole rock star dream just fizzled out, or you decided to put it on hold for a while?
Well, it's so we went on, my band went on a tour or two. And especially at that time, living out of the back of a van with a bunch of stinky dudes, it was just not my thing. I was like, is this really how I want to spend my time? And I worked in a recording studio for a while. I also did live sound for a couple clubs in Salt Lake, which that was actually really fun, but it was the hours. Like working at the recording studio, of course, like none of the bands want to pay you anything, but they want you to show up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and work till 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Working at the clubs, it's like you get there at 3:34 in the afternoon, set up the sound system, do sound check, and then you're tearing down equipment at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so it just was like, it was honestly more of the lifestyle. Plus, the other downfall, honestly, I started to not love music in the same way because I feel like I was so inundated with it, and it had become such like a grind of sorts that like I'd get in my car and I didn't even want to turn on my radio. So I feel like it was actually a good thing that it didn't happen, because now I love music. It's a huge part of my life, but it's a passion, not a job. And I think that saved music for me.
For sure. Yeah. It sounds like you've dipped your toes in quite a few different things. And do you feel like you found your calling now in terms of what you're doing and the coaching and supporting other people?
You know, I think so, because this has been the most constant part. Like I said, even during my hairdressing career, I liked working at the chair and like doing hair at the chair with my clients, but it was always my trips to go teach somewhere or to go stand in front of an audience or go help someone learn something. That's where I really got pumped. Like that's where I always found my excitement. And that's still the case today. Like if I get a chance to teach or coach, that's where I'm super, super happy. But I'll say this, like I kind of put a for now behind that. because like you said, I have dipped my toes in a lot of ponds, and I finally kind of accepted the fact that I kind of am one of those people that I like change. I really enjoy change. And so for now, I feel very on purpose. I feel like what I'm doing with my company is exactly what I should be doing in this moment. And if that changes in 2 years, I think I'll be okay with that.
Yeah, yeah, no, that sounds great. And it sounds like you've been inspiring people, and one of the reasons I reached out to you was the video you posted as part of the challenge we were doing around the voice. And it sounds like, it touched a lot of people because of their own potential struggles with their voice. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Why was it so important for you to put a video like that out there?
Well, to be honest with you, I kind of didn't realize how important it was. It's been a really tough part of my journey, and you'll like those of you that are listening, you'll kind of hear my voice come in and out a little bit, and it's not because it's a bad feed. It's because I'm still in the process of repairing a lot of damage that more was kind of emotional, psychological, and even spiritual in cause. But it really did a number on my vocal cords. It really beat up my voice. And so it was such a struggle for me. And it's just not something that gets talked about super often. Like, we don't really hear people talking about challenges with their voice unless they're a singer. You might hear about a singer that lost their voice or developed polyps or something, but we rarely hear about it just from just a normal, human being standpoint that has to use their voice for work or just to communicate. So during the challenge, I think that day it was something about share a part of your journey that you haven't shared or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I should talk about this voice stuff because it's something I've been studying too, because I realized there's a need to start talking about voice. Like, one of my passions is to train other educators. And one of the things that never happened, and I went through many, many different trainings on how to teach and how to be in front of an audience, like verbal skills, nonverbal skills, all that kind of stuff. But no one ever really talked about how to take care of your voice or how to speak in a way that's healthy for your voice. So I think between spending so much time speaking from a place that wasn't really healthy, then going through this real challenge of, honestly, I think what it comes down to is I wasn't speaking my truth anymore. So my body was just like, oh, well, guess what? You don't get to speak at all then, and just shut my voice down. And of course, when that happens, you're in a business meeting or something, and because you have to speak up, and I'm pushing my voice and straining and just ripping my vocal cords to shreds. So yeah, I felt like when he set that challenge out, it was like, oh yeah, this will be a good thing to share. It's something I'm excited to talk about. I had no idea what a response I would get from it, though. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, it was it was a moving video, and it was interesting because I think there's a Andrew Huberman podcast that had just come out that week as well, where he'd interviewed someone about the voice as well, and I think you touched on it. So for me, it was even more relevant because I just listened to that podcast episode. But for listeners, are you able to kind of share? So I know you touched on maybe the psychological aspect of it, not speaking your truth, but what other forms of damage do you feel like you caused? And what have you learned now that you can share with other people?
One of the biggest things is breath. We hear breath work a lot as far as it relates to nervous system health. That is an aspect of voice for sure. And that's kind of a whole nother thing we can touch on, is how the nervous system affects the vocal cords and how the dysregulation of the nervous system can affect those things. But even just how we breathe on a daily basis and where the breath comes in and out of, and honestly, every aspect of the voice, because every aspect of the breath, because the breath is our voice, is so essential. And I started to study oxygen advantage breath work, and I got certified as an oxygen advantage trainer. mainly because I went through like an oxygen advantage training, and it immediately had helped me to speak differently, where I actually feel like I could get a full breath and then release the full breath through a sentence and not feel like I was kind of chasing the breath, or like I had to kind of to try to catch my breath after a sentence. So breath work was really, really huge. And again, breath work from the standpoint of really functional, good quality and daily breathing habits.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point, I think breath work is talked about more now, but I still don't think it's considered as an important thing, right? People don't put a lot of focus on it, myself included. Like there's times where I barely know I'm like aware of it, that I'm breathing, right? And until I don't make a conscious effort to focus on my breath, I'm not bringing that awareness. So that's definitely an important thing. And do you believe that after you became more aware and trained in that space, to your point, it made a difference?
Oh, 100%. Because honestly, even if we would have done this podcast 2 years ago, like, and especially after today, because my voice is a little bit raw because I actually had to do a lot of speaking today. I had a lot of different meetings and stuff, and so it's a little more raw than usual, which, like, I'm working with different voice training exercises and things like that too, to keep the voice more soft in not necessarily soft as in volume, but soft as in tension. Because one of the things I mentioned, like when the nervous system starts to get up, like when we start to head up towards sympathetic, the fight flight kind of area, the first thing that changes is our breath, is our breathing pattern. It gets shallow, it gets tight, it gets fast. The same thing happens within the throat. The throat actually constricts. And that's why, when we start to get excited, we actually kind of talk up higher, is because the actual space from the larynx to the mouth gets shorter and tighter with that sympathetic tone in the nervous system. And so as all this stuff kind of happens, things get tighter, and there's more restriction. So part of my training with, there's this group called Still Voice Training, and they really talk about effort and like stress within the throat, especially within the larynx. And so especially a day like today, where it's been really heavy on a lot of talking, I have to be super conscious of the technique of speaking to keep that space open, to keep it relaxed, to keep it spacious. And so like all of it's crazy. It's just like all of these things kind of add up, but the breath work helped. Then it was like voice training helped. Then when I started to kind of study, especially polyvagal theory and how that affects the nervous system, or sorry, polyvagal theory is about the nervous system, but how the nervous system interacts with the actual vocal cords and the larynx and the throat and all of those different things, the diaphragm, which is, the main muscle for moving the air, all of those things are so greatly affected. And so it just kind of, it almost creates this like perfect storm of things to just really shut down our voice.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And then you also touched on, there's a spiritual component to it as well when it comes to our voice. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Yeah, in my experience, like my spiritual practices are basically meditation and my yoga practice. And I can't tell you how much learning to just stand on my feet properly and keep myself grounded to the floor through my legs, and actually support myself through my legs and move from like the center. Also my Aikido practice, like all of this stuff has taught me so much more about the entire body, but all of that stuff has also been such a support to the voice, because when we say the voice, there's kind of two versions of it, right? For Ken, there's the voice as far as what we say and how we, like what we share through the voice, but then there's the actual sound itself. And I think that both especially are very affected by our spiritual connections. Like if I don't feel spiritually grounded, if I don't feel spiritually connected to the energetic space around me, to the ground, to Mother Earth, to Father Sky, like if I don't feel connected to those things, my voice isn't going to want to come from the right place, at least in my experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I also got more grounded in my spiritual practice, there was like this depth that came back to my voice too. Because what had happened is I had taken a position within my work that was kind of more of like a corporate job sort of a thing. So I was in lots of business meetings and things like that I just had no place in. Like I shouldn't have been in those meetings, especially because I didn't care about those kinds of things all that much. So through that, I think that was that kind of loss of connection to purpose, loss of connection to everything, because I was also working these ridiculous hours. So of course, what gets taken off the table? Your spiritual practice, your mental health practices, your breath work, your eating healthy. And so I do feel like during that time, I got very disconnected to that spiritual element as well. Once I started to put that back in, it was like not just necessarily the sound of the voice, but where I felt like I wanted to come from as far as how I spoke and what I spoke about, that came back. That felt like it had more purpose to it.
Yeah. And I can relate to it in a little way. Like I know when I'm not grounded, and I'm very similar, like, I do work a corporate job, but I can find myself getting out of alignment with myself. And I know if I'm not grounding myself, my whole body is just reacting. And to your point, in your case, it was your voice. I feel it like just tensing up everywhere. And until I don't ground myself, whether it's through yoga or just being in nature, my whole body is just tensed up. So I can relate to that. But obviously I didn't appreciate, even like the finer details coming down to your voice being impacted.
Yeah. And I think those things, they manifest in different ways, right? Like they might manifest in back pain, it might manifest in cancer. Like, I think these dysregulations just manifest for, I'm careful to say for different reasons, because, it's always hard for me to say that like everything happens for a reason, because I don't want to be disrespectful to someone that's going through something quite tragic and say, well, you're going through it for a reason. Like, I just don't think that's super respectful. But I know, at least in my experience, this went to my voice for a purpose. Like it was very much for a reason. And it was to send me on this path to study in my voice, what I wanted to speak about, what I wanted to share with people, and to start trusting it. Because I had to lose, I lost so much trust. And I think that some of you out there that have gone through other issues with your body, it's almost like you lose trust with your own body, because it's like, come on, just let me speak. Just, why are you keep constricting? And so I think it was kind of meant to be that I walk this path of like, okay, how do I learn to trust my voice again? How do I speak my truth again? How do I speak authentically about things that I actually love and care about? And how does that actually affect the mechanics and the sound of my voice? So for me, I did feel like it manifested very specifically for a very specific purpose.
Yeah. And I agree with you, without minimizing anything someone else might be going through. What I like about doing this podcast is having people on here share their experiences, and often it's the meaning they find through the experience they go through, right? And I believe there's always a meaning. And again, there are certain tragic things that can happen, and in the moment it's hard to see that meaning. But obviously in your experience, you've been able to find the meaning here. And now, often what I find is these experiences allow people to share something they've learned with others and help. And it sounds like you're doing that. But what capacity are you doing that at now? And obviously, when you said you put that video out on Instagram, it wasn't something that you thought would make a huge difference, or it's not something you had put much thought into prior. But now with the impact it's had, and you mentioned offline that people had started reaching out to you, how has that made you feel, and how has that allowed you to do something different now?
I think that it's really freeing for me. It's so assuring to me that other people have experienced this, right? Like, I think that's part of why we want to share our story, is so that, because I know that a lot of people that reached out to me, that was what they expressed to me, like, wow, it's so awesome to hear from you that you've had this experience too, because it makes me less fearful that there's something specifically just wrong with me. And so by them reaching out to me, it also made me feel that way, because I hadn't really heard people, and I did lots of research, and I hadn't found anything in like papers and research and stuff about people that specifically had my experience. And I went to a couple different doctors, and they're like, oh, like I went to like an actual ear, nose, and throat doctor, therapist guy, and he scoped my whole throat and stuff, and he's like, besides your throat just being looking a little red from kind of pushing, he's like, I don't see anything actually wrong. So there was nothing out there that made me go, okay, I'm all right, like things are going to be all right. And so when I told the story, and people started to reach out and be like, oh my gosh, like it was so awesome to hear your story, because I don't feel alone. I don't feel like I'm crazy thinking that this actually isn't really a physical problem. It's more of a mental, emotional, spiritual challenge. It's great to just not feel alone. It's less scary, right? Mm-hmm. But I had definitely been thinking that, like I said, working with educators, that this was an important thing that I wanted to include if I started an educator training program, which I am working on right now with my friend Carlo. But I was like, and I told Carlo, I was like, one of the things that I really want to make sure we talk about is not just voice health, but like speaking through our authentic voice. And that's on a lot of different levels, because no one taught me that. Like, no one really shared that with me, especially in those, presenter trainings and things like that. So I've also, just because I have had so many people specifically reach out with really similar things, I've been kind of interviewing them and just like, tell me about your experience. When did this happen? How did it happen? What do you feel physically? Like, I talk to them about the body, because part of my coach training is through this group called Multiple Brain Integration Techniques. And it's all about embodiment. It's all about the intelligence of the body. And so just asking people like how they feel it, how they experience it in the body, I'm really surprised at how much similarity there is, like through my own experience, through other people's experience. And so I'm definitely feeling quite motivated now to continue that research, and hopefully not in the too distant future, be able to do something that is more of a very specific, almost like a coaching experience to help people to go through the things that I've gone through, to return myself to my authentic voice, and to start to know how to physically manage my voice better, so I'm not just beating the shit out of it,
right?
Keeping it completely torn apart.
Yeah. And you touched on the authentic voice a couple of times. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit for listeners? What does that mean?
To be honest with you, I think this is the foundation. As far as the people I've interviewed, I think this is the foundation of voice challenges, is stepping away from our authenticity, stepping away from our truth. Because my friend Sean Float, who is an incredible physical therapist, like a very intuitive physical therapist, he's also my yoga teacher, and he really understands like the deeper principles of, like, especially the Hatha yoga, the original Hatha yoga, because of his teacher. And so just even with working with him, there's so many things that I'm understanding about the body. And one of the things that he shared with me that I thought was just super mind-blowing is that the body is incredibly adaptable. And so it'll take a lot of what we throw at it But at some certain point, it either cannot or it will not adapt any longer. And that's where like pain and dysfunction start to come from if we continue to push it, right? And so I really think that once we start to step away from our authenticity, once we start to step away from our truth, which is really covering it up, right? With what we think we should be, what we think we should sound like, what we think we should be talking about. The further we step away from that, the body will adapt. And I could send you videos from 5-6 years ago, and you'll notice my voice actually sounds different because the voice did adapt. It adapted to almost this different persona. And so the sound of my voice wasn't even necessarily fully authentic because it was adapting. And I think that that's the pattern that I'm seeing is the further we step away from that authenticity, the further we step away from the truth and try and be something that we're not, I think the body can adapt and it'll continue to adapt until at some point it's just like, okay, this is too far away from authenticity. This is too far away from truth. So if you're not going to turn back and get back to your authenticity, we're going to stop talking and you're going to have to go on this journey, like kind of forcing it. Like I'm sure, you've probably had this experience, probably the people listening have had that experience where, some type of, even just like a really gnarly cold that like just puts you in bed for a couple days. You can usually look back and go, oh, that was probably on purpose. I probably needed to rest. And so I think that's a good example of that principle of, the body will roll with you if you want to put it through hell and, not be authentic and not be true to yourself. But at some point it's going to say, I'm done. We're not going to do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it may manifest itself in different ways, not necessarily only the voice, but and I guess, I appreciate the fact that you elaborated because like when we're not speaking our truth, that doesn't necessarily only mean just lying and not telling the truth, but it's also being ourselves, right? And not, and as I mentioned earlier, when I don't feel in alignment with myself, different things start happening for me, right? And whether it's my body breaking down or me just feeling tension in other parts of my body. But to your point, when we're not living that authentic life, well, different things can manifest.
Yeah. I'll give you a good example too, because I was still teaching hair. Like I was still doing a lot of hairdressing education. So at one point I did leave kind of the corporate-y position. Luckily I worked with a company that is super sweet, super loving. It's called Sam Via. And it's a hairdressing company. And I went to the leadership and I was like, hey, this job's killing me. I'm sorry. I know like when I took it, I thought I was going to love it and it's just killing me. So I'd love to just go back to being the education director and just focus on education. Luckily, they were totally open to the idea and I was able to step back into that position. But while I was teaching hair, I was again finding myself really having to push through this tightness in my throat. Right around that time, we started this separate YouTube and Facebook live that we were calling Wellness Wednesday, which was my opportunity to kind of talk more from my coach space and have my friends on that were wellness practitioners of all different sorts. And during that class, my throat would open up. And so it was pretty immediate that I started to go, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. I've known for years that I don't really give a shit about hair anymore, yet I still keep talking about it.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I talked about the thing I really was passionate about, with mindset, wellness, breath work, like if I was having conversations around that kind of stuff, I mean, my voice would open right up and like I'd be, more myself. I felt like I could be more myself. And so that's what I'm talking about. It's like as soon as I would step away from what I know in my heart was my truth, that's when it would get tight. As soon as I put myself back in the seat of where I knew I was supposed to be, all of a sudden I can talk again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. That's amazing. So what does like the journey look like now? I know you mentioned you're going through recovery, you're trying to, get back to 100%. What does that look like now for you in the foreseeable future?
I would say that first and foremost, it's making sure that every single day I'm going back and really intentionally crafting my day based on what's important to me. Like really being sure that the should of what I think I should be doing and how I should be handling myself isn't running my ship, because it used to, honestly. And I think a lot of us could probably relate to that. It's just, it's easy to get caught up in what we think other people need from us or want from us or expect from us. And so I'm much more intentional these days. Like I have my core values. I have this project that I developed at one point for myself, because it was during this time that I was like, I kind of don't feel like I know who the fuck I am anymore. And so I took this camping trip, and I just went camping on the coast. I just took my journal and I started writing. And these 3 questions came up. What do you look like? What do you sound like? What do you feel like? And I just kept journaling on those 3 questions. And it really drilled down to, oh my gosh, like I can look at this piece of paper and I can actually see my true self on this piece of paper. Because if I look like that to people, then I'm being my true self. If I sound like that to people, and I don't mean on the surface, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
how I represent myself from the inner world, of course, but even down to the clothing I wear, honestly. Like when I say what do I look like, when I put certain, this, man, like when you put certain pieces of clothing on, you're like, yes, I'm me. And then you put certain pieces of clothing on, and you're like, what the hell are you wearing? What are you doing?
Yeah.
So as I started to, once I created that for myself and I could look at it and say, yeah, this is the authentic me. If I look like this, feel like this, sound like this each day, I'm probably in alignment with myself. And so I have that piece of paper and my core values that I look at every single day, so that I just really set the intention clear. So all those subconscious stories, all the things the patterns, the old habits don't really have an opportunity to get back in. I do daily voice exercises. There's a guy named Roger Love. He's definitely he's a character. But I got his book a long time ago because it was just like the first thing that came up on Audible when I looked for like voice training. And he's got his voice training system's awesome. You can just like go, you can get his book and you can basically download like his voice practices and stuff. So I do those every day. And then I started to study the Estill voice training program, which is really cool. It really gets into the actual biology and science of the voice. And I've learned a ton with that. So I do voice exercises from that. But also just being really conscious to take care of my voice on a physical level. I've got my water here, and it's like water doesn't actually touch your vocal cords, which I always used to be like, well, I have to keep sipping water while I'm talking to keep them hydrated. That's actually not how it works. The water I'm drinking today is so that tomorrow there's moisture in my body to keep my vocal folds lubricated. Like you can't lubricate your vocal folds by taking a drink of water. It doesn't go down the same pipe, which I didn't know. That was all like news to me, right? So yeah, I think each day I have my authenticity exercises, I have my spiritual exercises, I have my actual practical voice exercises, and I'm just more conscious about like making sure that I'm taking care of my body in a way that, like on days like today that have been pretty strenuous on my voice, especially since I am still in the repair process, that I just, try to take care of it as best as possible.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because I think people can apply those practices regardless, right? That's something we should practice on a daily basis. So I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I want to thank you for coming on here. I know you mentioned that it's been a strenuous day. So thank you for sharing your voice with us. today. And for listeners that do want to get a hold of you or reach out to you, what are some ways they can do that?
I'm on Instagram, pretty much daily, making sure I'm following up with direct messages and stuff like that. So Instagram's an easy place. It's just Andrew.Carruthers. You can also go to my website, which, to be totally honest with you, I've spent all this time and energy putting into this awesome website right when I first started my company. And so much has happened in this last year and a half that it's evolved so much that I don't necessarily know that the website is real accurate to exactly what I'm doing right now. But if you just want to kind of understand a little bit more about me, it's a good resource. And that's thejourneyist.life. The journeyist is just journey with IST at the end.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Andrew. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing all of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. This is definitely something that I'm just stoked to be able to share more of this because of how awesome of a response I've had to it so far. So I appreciate the platform to be able to talk about it more.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. As always, please subscribe to the podcast if you enjoy the episodes, or leave a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. Thank you again, and until next week.